Hey, welcome to Gold Scratch. So this video is going to be quite a bit different than any video that I've ever made before, and probably any that I've ever seen. We're going to use this engine as just the subject of something that I want to explain, and that's this. If you're a car guy and you're always looking to buy an engine on Racing Junk or eBay or something like that, or if you've already bought it and you don't know what you have. I actually have a 409 coming in here in a week or two, like that, where the customer bought it and you're not really sure what's inside of it. And we're going to go through this process I'm going to describe to you today to determine a couple things. What is it? Who is its mother? And where did it come from? What application is it? And once we know what it is, then what condition is it in? Is it ready to, could you start it safely? Should you take it apart first? Is it damaged? All that stuff, so that you not only know what you got, you know what the application is, you know whether it's roadworthy, or you know if you got an engine that you have to rebuild before you even take it apart. Because if you get that wrong and you start up an engine that the valve lifters are all rusted in the bores and they don't turn, you're going to destroy it when you start it up. So that's not very smart either. So you really need to do your homework. And we're going to use a whole variety of tools today, some that viewers may or may not have. But I'm going to describe them all to you, and I use these all the time in my shop, but you may have to use whatever you have. So one of the things that inspired this video, we have an endoscope camera, and we'll put a link actually in the video for that. And that's one of the things that inspired this video, because I actually had an application a week or so where a friend bought a car, a basket case basically, that with lots of beautiful parts with an engine in it. He had no idea what it was. We were able to determine the size of the engine, where it came from, what the compression ratio was, and whether it was in condition to be started or not. So he knows what to do next. So the camera inspired this. We're also going to use a dial indicator to measure the lift of the camshaft. We're going to put the camera down into the valve, into the cylinder head. We're going to put it inside the cylinder. One of the other tools we're going to use is a gauge to determine whether the cooling system. Now, if the engine's not in a car, you can't do that, obviously. If it's in a car application, you can put a gauge like this, pressurize the cooling system to 15 or 20 psi. If you got a head gasket leak or a water leak anywhere, you're going to find that out pretty quick. So a leak down tester will test the cylinder pressure that's lost through a damaged engine, worn out rings or bearings or whatever. I'll give you some guidelines to use when you use the leak down tester. Not everybody has one of those. The compression tester is a pretty handy tool. They're not expensive. You can buy them at your local parts store for a reasonable price, or on Amazon or whatever. So those are a variety of tools that we're going to go through and use. So let me start off. First of all, you need to know what you got. So that starts with the casting number of the block. There's really two stages of manufacturing, three stages really. The block gets cast. All the other parts get cast and manufactured, and then at some point the engine gets assembled. So starting with the block casting number, so that number is, I got it here, 3932371. So nowadays with Google and the internet and computers, all you need to do is Google that number and up will come forums for other Chevrolet cars, whether they're El Caminos or Camaros or whatever, a variety of sources of information which will tell you what that block casting is. So in this case, I already know, of course, if you look that number up, it'll tell you that that casting is 307, and 307 block casting is unique because it's not a 4-inch bore. All the subsequent block casting numbers other than this number will be for a 4-inch bore engine, and there's a variety of those. So that's the first thing you need to do. So now we know it's a Chevrolet 307 block. Okay, the next thing is the engine is cast. The block is set outside to mature for hopefully a little while before it goes to get machined. and then the engine is assembled. So on the right hand, on the passenger side of every block, unless it's been shaved off, milled off, there is a series of numbers, and those numbers are meaningful as well. So I'm just reading from my notes. The number is K0823UN. So the K is the plant that it was manufactured, assembled at. In this case, it's McKinnon Industries in St. Catharines, Ontario. A lot of them are the Flint plant, but I'm pretty sure this K means McKinnon Industries. 0823 means it's August the 23rd. The first two numbers are the month, and the next two numbers are the day. And then the suffix UN, you have to look that up. The suffix will tell you what the application is. So in this case, if you looked up this whole number, it would tell you it was cast at McKinnon Industries, 23rd of August, UN for a 1969 Chevrolet truck. The application is on there. Often, and this block doesn't have it, there's a second set of numbers that are smaller, which includes the VIN number. 4 of those numbers are the same as the VIN number. And in many cases, if you really want a period correct or a correct numbers correct engine, ideally that VIN number, if you're buying a car and you want to know whether it's got the original engine, those VIN numbers should match the VIN number of the car itself. So that's one way to validate, is this the engine that came in the car? The other thing you have to watch for, sometimes there's no numbers if the block's been decked. The other thing is there's guys out there building engines and re-stamping them. So in some cases they'll say, what stamp would you like? And they'll give it to you. So watch for that. As long as you know what you're buying, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you know what you're buying. So the next thing is, now we know that it's a 327 block. Then the other thing we can look at, and it's difficult to show on camera, but we're going to put insert into the video a shot of it. It's an identification looking at the flange of the crankshaft. Okay, just to correct something, I think I said 327 block. It's a 307 block. And there is a big difference. A 327 block has a 4-inch bore. A 307 block has a 3 15/16 inch bore. So that's a very important difference. Okay, so that covers off the block. The engine assembly is once again identified by the number that's stamped on the block. In the case of the casting, it's cast into the block, so you can't re-stamp that. The other thing about the block that I did miss, on this side of the block, just out in front of the it's difficult to show on the camera, is actually the date code when this engine was actually cast, when the casting was made. And those numbers identify the month and the day and the year that the block was cast. Now, I have to point something out. GM didn't put all these numbers on so car guys could look up what they got 50 or 60 years later. It was a quality control measure. They were all identified as far as the manufacturing process, so that if you ran into a problem with any part, a block or any other component, they could use that information to go back and find out when it was made. And in some cases, blocks may have had to be quarantined because they're made after that and they didn't know whether they had the same problem or same condition, etc. So it's really a manufacturing process, quality control part of the process for manufacturing, but it's very helpful right now if you're a car guy to identify that. So the next thing we need to do is take a valve cover off and look at a cylinder head, and there's a casting number. In most cases, this information applies to any engine. We're using a small block Chev, but it's pretty typical. The casting number for the head, cylinder head, is there. Okay, so that casting number is 14014418. Hey, we looked that number up. This head casting did not come off of this engine. I happen to know that already, obviously. If you look that number up, this head casting came off a 305 HO engine that was made after that in the 1980s or so. And we did use these head castings for a specific reason. So now you know what block you got and what heads you have. You can actually, with the aid of the camera, calculate the compression ratio. So before we get to that, one of the other things we can do is take the camera, I've got it turned on already, and shove it down into the lifter valley you can do that so you can see what's going on in there. Okay, we got the camera down through there's lots of drain back holes in the castings of the heads. So I've just inserted the camera into one of those holes. I can see into the lifter valley. And what the heck, there's link bars on these lifters. So this is a roller cam. So I know that it's a roller cam. And in one case that I was able to use this camera recently, the owner didn't know if he had a roller cam or a flat tappet cam. And that's really important because the startup procedure is very, very different. If you want to take the time, you can put this camera in multiple other holes and look down in there and look at the condition. If the lifters are all rusted, if this engine been stored for a long time and they're rusted, it's pretty likely they're not going to rotate when the engine started up. So that's pretty important. The next thing we're going to do with the camera is look down into one of the cylinders. I took one spark plug out and put it in there. And we can actually see the top of the piston. You can actually see that the piston is bored 60 thou over. It's a flat top piston with 4 valve reliefs. So from that information, I know that the volume of the piston is probably between 5 and 10 cc's. So looking at that, and you can put this in every cylinder if you want, if you're worried about the condition of the cylinder, or if has an engine been damaged, if there's a broken piston or something, you can put it in every piston and every cylinder. We're just going to show one today, but you could put it in all of them and determine whether or not. Obviously, if you find one damaged, then you know this thing's coming apart. You can see there's no rust on the cylinder walls. Yeah, you can actually see the crosshatch in the cylinder walls, and there's no rust on it. So you know a lot about that cylinder. You can do that with every cylinder. So now what have we got so far? We know that the block is a 307 block. You look at the end of the crankshaft, and we can see that it's a 307 crankshaft. That's pretty important. And actually, the flange of that crankshaft, it's difficult to see with the flex plate on. Could be probably a 307 or 327, 3 1/4 inch stroke, same thing. So we know that. Because we know the head casting numbers, we know the combustion chamber volume. If you look it up, I know that it's 58 cc's because I already looked it up. Okay. So in order to determine compression, you need to know the bore, the stroke, the engine size. You need to know the head gasket thickness, the combustion chamber volume, and the deck height. So you can't really measure the deck height with the camera, no, but typically it's, unless the engine's been decked, and this one has not been decked, okay, because it's got the real original numbers on it, it's about 30 thou, maybe 30 or 35 thou. If you look at the head gasket, you can see a little bit of the head gasket sticking out. It's difficult to see, but you can see a little bit of it, okay, at the bottom of the head, and I can see that's a steel head gasket. So that head gasket's only 15 thou thick. If it was a standard Felpro head gasket, it's probably closer to 40 thou thick. So if you take your bore, your stroke, combustion chamber volume, the cylinder, the piston volume, which is probably 5 to 10 cc's, pick a number, 7 or 8 cc's. The deck height is probably 30 thou. A head gasket thickness is 15 thou. Take that information, Google compression calculator. You'll get a number of calculators where the algorithms are already figured out. One of them is Summit. Put the numbers in there and you will know pretty close what compression ratio your engine is going to have. That Summit algorithm is pretty darn accurate. I've actually calculated from basic principles in the past, and I got exactly the same answer. So the Summit one's a lot easier to use than the way I do it. So that's what I actually use nowadays. So we know now that it's a 307. It's been bored 60 thou, so that's 312. We know the bore and stroke. We know the compression ratio. Next thing, what kind of camshafts have got in it? So I've just mocked up here quickly how to measure that. And basically I use an engine plate bolted to the head, the deck of the head, and dial indicator on the push rod. Now, one thing to point out, this is not quite correct. What I should do is take that rocker arm off and put the dial indicator directly on the push rod, because with the hydraulic cam, if you turn that engine over against the valve spring pressure, the lifter will probably collapse a little bit and you'll never get an accurate reading. So you need to do it where there's no resistance. Sometimes guys do it right on the valve. You can do it on the valve, but unless you've got a solid lifter in there, you're probably not going to get a good number, because the spring is going to force the cam to collapse a little bit, or the lifter to collapse a little bit. So if you want to go even further, you can take one spring off, put it on a spring tester. I have a spring tester. If it's got 80 to 100 pounds of pressure in the valve closed position, it's probably a flat tappet cam and not a very big cam. If it's got 150 pounds or more, it's probably a roller cam, and it's probably a pretty big cam. So the spring will tell you a lot as well. Depends how far that you want to go. So, okay, I should point out, not everybody has a dial indicator and a leak down tester and a compression tester and a camera, but I'm just going to trying to point out all the various diagnostic kind of tools that you can use to determine, as I said before, what engine have you got, what condition is it in. The next thing you need to know, once you have that established, I think we've established that. We know it's a 307. We know it's been bored 60 thou. We can do the calculation. It's going to be around, based on all the numbers I've already provided, about 9.5 to 1 compression. So this is obviously not an original 307. We know that it's got a roller camshaft, okay? And once again, when we're looking in there with the camera, if there's a bunch of rust in there, broken parts in there, then we know we probably shouldn't start this thing up. Because one thing to note, if an engine is rusted together, you're going to probably do damage to it by trying to start it, and you shouldn't start it. You should take it apart. However, there's a lot of cases I've started engines that hadn't been started for 25 years successfully and never had a problem with that. So now we know what the engine is, what the compression ratio is, kind of fairly close, whether it's a big camshaft or not. And so the next thing to know is what is condition of it. So one simple thing, if it's in a car, compression tester is probably a $30 or $40 tool, something like that. Not expensive. So it's pretty simple. You screw this in where the spark plug goes, you crank the engine over, and it tells you what cranking pressure you have. So if you got reasonable cranking pressure, you should check every cylinder, because if you have, say, a really nice number of 150 to 160 on most of them, and one's 30, you know you got a problem in that one cylinder. So that's really what you're trying to find out, is if there's one cylinder that's not in good condition. Okay, so that's one good test. So that tells you your cranking pressure, and that should be consistent. You can actually look up online and find algorithms that will calculate your estimated cranking pressure based on your compression. So that's one other thing you can do. A little more tool that you may not be likely to have is a leak down tester. And for what it's worth, every engine I build gets these diagnostic checks before and after being started up. So this tester measures the percentage. It's not really percentage, it's actually a relative number. The amount of air that leaks down compared to the pressure put in. So you have to have a compressor, first of all. This gets screwed into the cylinder that you're testing. You have to block the cylinder from turning, because it might turn on you when you put compression in it. And it'll give you a relative number of leakage. So typically an engine that's in good condition will have something between 10 and 20%. I'll say percent. It says percent leakage. It's really just a relative number. That's just the amount of air that leaks past out of the cylinder when you're pressurizing it. So one of the other values of this tester is, if you have the engine out of the car particularly, you don't need to be able to turn the engine over to do this test. So if you have an excessive leakage, where is it coming from? It's either coming from a valve, intake valve or exhaust valve, or it's coming past the rings. If it's coming from an intake or exhaust valve, push your ear up to the carburetor, you'll actually hear the air escaping back through the intake. If it's coming out of an exhaust valve, you can actually hear the air escaping through the exhaust side. So typically most of the leakage will be past the piston rings into the crankcase and out of your where your PCV valve opening is, or your breather hole opening is. You can hear that and see that and feel that actually, how much there is. Once again, you're looking for a difference. If it's all 10 to 20, and it's pretty good numbers, and one's 40% or 50%, there's a problem with that cylinder, and you need to look into that. You probably shouldn't be starting the engine if you do that. So that's one way to determine. One of the other things that, if you want to go crazy with it, is I've sometimes taken a paint marker and put a paint marker on every push rod, on the top of every push rod. Crank the engine over, that push rod should rotate. If it's not rotating, then your lifter is probably not rotating, and you're probably going to have a problem if you start it up, if it's a flat tappet camshaft. If it's a hydraulic camshaft, no, it won't rotate. But if it's a if it's a flat tappet camshaft, it'll rotate. If it's a roller camshaft, it won't rotate, just to cover that off. So those are things that you can do to determine whether I mentioned it or not. You can pressurize the water system, the cooling system. You can put 15 or 20 psi in there, let it hold and watch the gauge. If it's going down quickly, then you got either a head gasket leaking, water leaking, and sometimes leaking into your oil. And so that brings up the next issue that we can do. So one of the diagnostic checks is, if you don't know what you got, drain the oil through a paint filter. And if there's a lot of junk in your oil, the engine's been damaged or broken up inside, you'll probably find some junk in there. Use a magnet to find that. And one of the other values of the camera, a lot of blocks, there's no versions of this block where we're 4-volt main, but if you get into the 69 to 79, all the 4-inch bore blocks, the 0010 block, some of them were 4-volt main blocks. If they were in a Corvette L82 or they were in a Z28, they're 4-volt main blocks, and sometimes if they're in trucks, they're 4-volt main blocks. If they're in a car, they're just a 2-volt main block. You can actually put the endoscope camera up the hole in the where the drain plug comes out and see up there whether it's 2 or 4-volt main. So a lot of guys buy an engine. The only way they find out if it's a 4-volt main is they take the oil pan off. Now you don't have to do that. So that's one of the other values of doing that. If all that checks out, you know what you got. The lifters are rotating. You don't have any broken parts that you can see in the cylinders. There's no rust. Start it up. I've started up engines once again. I've been sitting for years and successfully and without any issues. Make sure you got some good oil in them and monitor the process. I would start it and run it for a very short period of time, shut it off, do your diagnostics again, and then decide whether you got an engine that's ready to go. Okay, hope you found that helpful. I think what we tried to cover off today was, if you're looking to buy an engine, or you already bought it, or you bought found a barn find car and you want to know whether the engine in it is original or correct, or you can start it. We've covered off how you can determine what the engine is and what condition it is in it, and whether it's worthy to be started, and what process you should use to start it. For example, if it's got a roller cam versus a flat tappet cam, it's a different process. So I hope you found that helpful. Just for demonstration purposes, I don't know if I ever showed I guess I have showed under the hood of my original Z28 Camaro. That is not an original engine. For better or worse, it makes 100 more horsepower than the original engine, but it's not an original engine. That's an application. If the engine's in a car, it's a different process, of course. And just to cover off, I've described the process using a lot of tools not everybody has. Not everybody has a leak down tester, has a coolant system tester, a dial indicator, all that stuff. But you can take any one of these processes and apply it and probably get a pretty good idea of what you're looking at, either before you buy an engine or if you've already bought it before you start it up. If anybody's interested in seeing more detail, we didn't actually go through the methodical process of doing all these things other than quickly describe them, because it would make a long video. If someone was interested in that kind of detail, I can certainly do that. So please leave a comment. Once again, subscribers, we love it. If we get subscribers, likes, once again, look forward to future videos on the 307. We're going to be running the 307 on the future video. We're going to be installing the 427 in a 1966, beautiful 66 Chevelle. in a few months. I'm going to have a 409 in here in a few weeks, and we're going to be going through this pretty much the same process I've just described, because we don't know what's inside that 409. So we're going to do that, determine what we got before we even start taking it apart. So like, subscribe, notifications, all that's good. We appreciate that. And thank you for watching Gold's Garage.